5 years. That's how long it's been since Mum died. Sometimes it feels like 5 minutes. Sometimes it feels like 50 years. Grief has this strange elasticity. It stretches and snaps back when you least expect it. I remember the night she died. The air was so still it felt like the world had stopped breathing. After that, Dad and I learned how to live inside the quiet in the beginning. We were like two ghosts orbiting the same house, barely talking, always careful not to stir the dust of her memory too hard. Mum used to fill every corner with laughter, music, the smell of cinnamon tea. After she was gone, the house was just walls and echoes. I'd come home from school, drop my bag by the couch, and the silence would greet me louder than any voice. Dad tried to fill it with routine work, dinner, dishes, but the space between us stayed untouched. I was 12 then, too young to understand what loss really meant. I thought grief had an end date, that after a while you just move on. But grief doesn't move on. It just moves in. It rearranges your furniture, changes your rhythm, and starts speaking for you when you're too tired to find words. The years blurred. I got taller, quieter, and better at pretending everything was normal. Dad, though, he started fading in a different way. He'd stare at his phone too long, re-watch old home videos, talk to the empty space at the dinner table. I'd catch him whispering night, love, when he thought I wasn't listening. Then came Ruth. It started innocently enough. One day, Dad told me he was meeting an old friend for coffee. The way he said it made something in my chest tighten. He didn't owe me an explanation, but I knew the tone, soft, careful, rehearsed. When he came back, his eyes had that cautious sparkle I hadn't seen since before Mum got sick. Her name entered our house slowly. Ruth said this, Ruth likes that. Ruth told me about this place we should try. At first, I didn't think much of it. I wanted Dad to be happy. Hell, he deserved to smile again. But there was something about the way her name started weaving itself into our every conversation that made me feel like a guest in my own home. The first time I met her was at a diner. Dad had insisted, calling it just a casual lunch. I remember watching her walk in tall.com, wearing a pale blue sweater that looked too soft for real life. She smiled at me like she already knew me, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Hi, you must be Ellie," she said, her voice warm but measured. "Yeah," I replied, poking at my fries. Dad beamed at us like we were two puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. I wanted to feel that way too, but something about Ruth's presence made the air feel too neat, too organized, like grief had been vacuumed out of the room, replaced with lavender perfume. They started seeing each other more. Dinners, movies, weekend getaways. I told myself it was fine. She wasn't living with us, and I didn't need to like Hi, just needed to coexist. But every time I saw Dad texting her, that little part of me that still clung to Mum's memory started to twist tighter. 2 years passed like that, me, Dad, and Ruth in a delicate triangle that somehow managed not to collapse. She didn't push, and I didn't pull. When she came over, I made myself scarce. I'd sleep at Grandma's, hang out at my best friend's house, stay late at school. Dad would joke that I had perfect timing, but we both knew it wasn't coincidence. I didn't want to intrude on their world, and I didn't want Ruth intruding on mine. But time has a way of shifting balances. Somewhere between quiet dinners and casual introductions, Ruth stopped being a visitor and started being an influence. Not officially, not legally, but emotionally. And maybe that's what made it worse. It started small, Dad quoting her when making decisions. Ruth thinks it's best if. Ruth says that's not safe. Ruth suggested you try. Every mention was like a pebble hitting a still pond, sending ripples through everything I thought I could control. I wanted to scream that she wasn't my mom, that her opinions shouldn't dictate how I lived, but I swallowed it. For Dad, for peace. Still, I noticed how his tone changed when her name came up. He wasn't asking anymore, he was relaying. Decisions weren't ours. They were filtered through someone else. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I was halfway down the hall when I heard my name. She needs structure, Tom, Ruth said. You can't just let her decide things like that. Dad's voice was tired. She's 17, Ruth. I'm trying to give her some freedom. Freedom's good, Ruth said, but boundaries keep her safe. That word boundaries stuck in my brain like a thorn. Safe from what? From living? From making choices? I walked back to my room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling until the hum of their voices dissolved into silence. I wanted to believe Ruth cared, but I couldn't help feeling like every time she opened her mouth about me, she erased a little bit of Mum. It's not that Ruth was cruel. She was polite, kind even, in that perfectly measured way people are when they're trying to win approval. But there was always this undertone, like she was slowly rearranging my life into something more manageable for her. The real shift came one afternoon in spring. My best friend, Mara, invited me to her family's cabin for the weekend. It was supposed to be this fun getaway before exam season, bonfires, lake swims, junk food, all of it. I went to Dad with excitement bubbling in my chest. Can I go? I asked. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. I'll think about it. That phrase should have been my warning. He didn't bring it up again for weeks. Then, one night, out of nowhere, he mentioned it. Ruth wasn't sure about you going, he said, but we decided it's fine as long as you call me 3 times while you're there. I froze. We decided. Wait, what do you mean? Ruth wasn't sure. Dad looked uncomfortable. She thought it might not be safe, being that far out without parents around. What does Ruth have to do with it? I asked. He didn't answer. Just shrugged, like it wasn't worth discussing. I called Mara later and told her I could go, but the excitement had drained out of me. All I could think was how this stranger, woman who didn't even live with us, had a say in something that used to be just between me and Dad. That was the first crack. The second came a few months later when Dad had a business trip. I asked if I could stay home alone while he was gone. He hesitated again, then said, Ruth doesn't like the idea of you being alone for that long. And just like that, it was decided I'd stay with my aunt. Ruth doesn't like Ruth thinks. Ruth says her name was everywhere. Like wallpaper I couldn't peel off, but I didn't confront Dad, not yet. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Maybe he just needed someone else's opinion. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe this was temporary. I didn't know then that it was building towards something bigger, something inevitable, because when people try to rearrange your life, even out of love, it starts to feel like the walls are closing in. And sooner or later, you either stay quiet and suffocate, or you push back hard enough to break something. It started with a Christmas market. Just a small trip out of state with Mara and her family, hot cocoa, twinkling lights, handmade ornaments, all that holiday charm. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. It wasn't reckless or dangerous. We'd be driving up in the morning, and coming home the same night. But somehow, even that simple plan managed to twist into another battlefield between me, Dad, and Ruth. I remember walking into the living room, where Dad was sitting on the couch, reading something on his tablet. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "Mara's family invited me to a Christmas market out of state next month. Can I go?" He looked up, expression thoughtful. Then there it was again. That cursed line, "I'll need to talk to Ruth first." It hit me like static in my chest. My patience snapped, quiet but sharp. "Why?" I asked. Dad frowned, like I'd just asked something wildly out of line. "What do you mean, why? Why do you need to talk to Ruth about it? It's my trip, not hers." His voice turned measured, calm in that way people use when they're hiding irritation. "Because Ellie, she's my partner. We make decisions together." I laughed, but not because it was funny. "Decisions about me. She's not my parent, Dad." He sighed, put down the tablet, and leaned forward. "She's an important part of my life, and that means she's part of yours too, whether you like it or not." That's when something cracked open inside me. All the tiny moments I'd swallowed, all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, they flooded out in one rush of heat. "She doesn't live here. You're not married. She doesn't get to make decisions about me." Dad's jaw tightened. "You're being disrespectful." "No, I'm being honest." I stood there, trembling with anger. "You keep letting her have a say in things that don't involve her. Who I see, where I go, what I do, none of that should go through Ruth first." He stood up too, towering over me. "Don't talk about her like that. She cares about you." I felt the bitterness rise like bile. "She doesn't even know me. You barely let her be around when I'm home. And I like it that way." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Dad's eyes hardened. "You don't get to decide who I consult, Ellie. Ruth's my partner, and if I want her opinion, I'll ask for it." I crossed my arms, my voice shaking. "Then I guess I'll start letting random people have a say in your life too." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't even think before I said it. "If you ever need me to take care of you someday, like if you're old or sick, I'll just find some guy I'm dating and let him decide where to send you." How's that sound? The words came out colder than I expected, sharper. I regretted them the second they left my mouth, but it was too late. Dad's face changed. It wasn't just anger, it was hurt. Deep, quiet hurt. "That's a cruel thing to say," he whispered. "Petty and dangerous." "Maybe," I said. "But it's exactly what you're doing to me." He took a step back, shaking his head. "You can't compare that. You're a child. I'm your father. It's my responsibility to make decisions that keep you safe. And it's mine to live my life without a stranger pulling the strings." He exhaled hard, like he'd run out of patience. "You're being a brat, Ellie." That word sliced deeper than I expected. Brat, it was what people called kids who didn't know how to behave. It wasn't what you'd called your daughter who'd spent half her life trying not to fall apart. "Fine," I said, my throat tightening. "If telling you how I feel makes me a brat, then I guess that's what I am." He turned away. "Go to your room. We'll talk later." But later never came. The next morning, Dad was quiet, barely making eye contact. Ruth wasn't around, but her absence felt heavy, like a shadow that stretched across the breakfast table. He left early for work, and I sat there staring at the half-empty cereal bowl. wondering if I'd just broken something that couldn't be fixed. Later that day, I found out he'd vented to Aunt Lisa, his sister. She called me, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, your dad's upset. Says you called Ruth a random woman." "Because she is a random woman," I said. "She's not family." There was a pause. Then, to my surprise, Aunt Lisa sighed. "Honestly, I get where you're coming from. You're almost an adult, Ellie. He shouldn't be handing her authority over your choices." It was the first time someone had actually said it out loud, the thing I'd been screaming inside my head for months. Validation felt like oxygen when Dad found out she'd taken my side. He lost it. They argued loud. I heard snippets from his phone call that night, his voice rough and angry. "She's undermining me, Lisa. She's not your kid. Ruth's not her mother. Don't twist this. You don't understand what it's like trying to raise a teenager alone." The call ended with a slammed door and another silence that stretched for days. But the story didn't end there, because a few nights later, Dad came to my room. His face was tired, the kind of tired that settles in your bones. "Have you apologized to Ruth yet?" he asked. I didn't even look up from my homework. "No, Ellie." His tone had that edge, again the one that meant he was running out of patience. "You hurt her feelings." I set my pen down. "I hurt her feelings. Yes, you called her a random woman. She's been nothing but kind to you." I finally looked up. "She's been polite, not kind. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment. "You really don't like her, do you?" I hesitated. "I don't know her enough to like or dislike her. I just don't think she should have power over my life." He shook his head slowly, disappointment heavy in his voice. "You're so stubborn. You know that." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But I'm not wrong." That was it. He left without another word. The door clicked shut, and for a long time, I just sat there listening to the hum of the house. The same hum that used to fill the space between Mum's laughter and Dad's silence. It was strange, realizing that grief wasn't the thing breaking us anymore. It was control. It was love trying to reshape itself into something that didn't fit either of us. I started noticing other things after that. The way Dad would defer to Ruth in conversations. The way he'd glance at her for approval before answering me. It was subtle but constant, like gravity pulling him toward her opinion every time. And Ruth, she wasn't malicious, but she didn't exactly hold back either. I'd catch her offering gentle suggestions that were really just disguised directives. "Tom, don't you think Ellie should spend more time with family instead of friends right now?" "Tom, maybe Ellie shouldn't have her phone past 10. It helps her focus." I wasn't even in the room half the time she said it, but I always found out later. I could feel myself hardening. I started keeping my distance even more. Less talking, more avoidance. If they went out, I stayed home. If she came over, I disappeared. It wasn't sustainable, but it was all I could do to keep my sanity, because underneath the frustration was something deeper fear. Fear that Dad was slowly replacing the version of us that used to exist. Fear that Ruth was rewriting my family history one subtle suggestion at a time. I tried to picture what Mum would think of all this. Would she tell me to be more patient? To understand that love can look different the second time around? Or would she pull me close and whisper, "You're right to stand your ground"? I didn't know, but I missed her more than ever. Christmas came and went without me going to the market. Dad never gave me an answer. He just let the opportunity pass until it was too late. Maybe that was his way of punishing me quietly. Without admitting it, Ruth didn't come around for a couple of weeks after that. When she did, she was colder. Polite, yes, but distant. I could tell Dad had told her everything I said. At dinner one night, she tried to make small talk. "I heard you're applying to colleges," she said. "That's exciting." "Yeah," I said flatly. "Tom told me you're thinking about out-of-state schools. Maybe you should start with something closer to home. Transition slowly." Dad nodded in agreement, like her word sealed the deal. She's got a point. That's when I realized Ruth wasn't just part of his life anymore. She was part of the decision-making machine, and I wasn't in control of my own gears. By the end of the night, I excused myself to my room and shut the door. My hands were shaking not from anger, but from exhaustion. I felt like I was constantly defending invisible borders, drawing lines no one else could see. But every war has its moment of no return. The day you realize talking won't fix it, compromise won't save it, and silence won't protect it anymore. Mine was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't be quiet. The morning it all finally unraveled started out deceptively calm. The air was heavy with winter stillness, that kind of muted cold where even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Dad was in the kitchen, making coffee. I could hear the low hum of the machine, the scrape of a spoon against ceramic. "Morning," I said, stepping in. "Morning," he replied, not looking up. His voice was clipped, detached, the same tone he'd used since our last argument. I sat down at the table, watching him pour his coffee. I thought about saying something neutral, asking about work, about the weather, but the tension was too thick. We'd been dancing around it for weeks, pretending the silence was peace. It wasn't. It was the sound of a storm holding its breath. Finally, I broke it. "So, are you still mad at me?" He froze, coffee pot in hand, then set it down with a sigh. "Mad doesn't even begin to cover it, Ellie." I felt my stomach twist, because I told the truth. He turned, then eyes sharp. "Because you were cruel." "Cruel?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean honest?" "There's a difference." He stepped closer, coffee mug clutched tight. "You think calling Ruth a random woman and comparing her to some hypothetical boyfriend who'd decide my care isn't cruel?" I didn't answer right away. The silence pressed against me, heavy and accusing. "She's not my mum," I finally said. "And you keep acting like she has the right to decide things for me." He shook his head. "She's trying to help. She cares about you. You don't even give her a chance." "Because I didn't ask for her help," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I don't need another parent, Dad. I just need you." He looked like I'd slapped him. His jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered with something hurt, guilt, maybe both. "You have me," he said quietly. "No," I said, voice cracking. "I had you. Before Ruth, before all of this. Now I have to share you with someone who wants to make rules about my life without even knowing me." He rubbed his forehead like he was trying to erase the conversation. "You're overreacting. This is about respect, Ellie. Ruth's part of my life, and you need to show her that." "I'm not disrespecting her," I said. "I'm just not pretending she's something she's not." That was the moment the air shifted. His patience snapped like a brittle twig. "You're done talking to me like that," he said, his tone low, dangerous. "You will apologize to her, today." My throat tightened. "No," his eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." I said no. The room went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. He took a slow breath, like he was trying to hold himself together. "If your mother were here..." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut the air. "Don't bring Mum into this." He froze. I could see the flicker of regret before the anger took over again. "You think she'd want this? You think she'd be proud of the way you're acting?" "Maybe she'd be proud that I'm standing up for myself," I said, my voice trembling, "because you're the one who keeps letting someone else speak for you." For a long moment, we just stood there, two people who loved each other but didn't know how to anymore. The grief, the loneliness, the guilt, it was all tangled up in the argument, too messy to separate. Then he said it. The thing that broke something deep inside me. "If you can't accept Ruth's place in my life, then maybe you shouldn't be part of it either." The words hit harder than he realized. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I felt my eyes burn, but I refused to cry in front of him. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're choosing her?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was the answer. I nodded slowly. "Okay, then I'll stay at Aunt Lisa's for a while." His face softened, just a little. "Ellie, no," I said. "You made it clear. Ruth gets a say." "I don't." I walked to my room, shoved a few clothes into a bag, grabbed my phone charger, and left. I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't turn back. When I got to Aunt Lisa's, she opened the door and saw my face. She didn't ask questions, just hugged me. The kind of hug that makes the world quiet for a second. "I figured this was coming," she said softly. I sat on her couch, shaking, my heart still pounding. "He told me I have to apologize to Ruth or I'm not part of his life anymore." Lisa frowned. "That's not fair. He's lost his sense of balance, Ellie. He's trying to rebuild his life. But he's doing it by giving someone else your space." "Yeah," I whispered. "And I don't think he even realizes he's doing it." That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee, faintly like Mum's old kitchen. I wondered if grief ever really ends, or if it just changes faces. Maybe Ruth wasn't the enemy. Maybe she was just a symptom of how lost Dad still was. But that didn't make it hurt any less. A week passed before Dad called. I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, his voice was quieter, gentler. "Hey, kiddo, hey." There was a pause. "You at Lisa's?" "Yeah." Another silence. Then, "You planning to come home soon?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Are you planning to listen next time?" He sighed. "I miss you." I swallowed hard. "I miss you too. But I can't keep pretending Ruth gets to decide my life." "She's not deciding your life," he said. "She's just trying to look out for you." "Then she can do that by staying in her lane," I replied. He chuckled softly, but there was sadness in it. "You sound like your mother when you're mad." That one hit different. For the first time in months, I smiled a little. "Good." We talked a bit more careful, tentative, like people learning to walk again after a fall. He didn't ask me to come back right away, and I didn't offer. But something about the conversation felt lighter, like we were both finally breathing again. Ruth texted me a few days later. "Ellie, I'm sorry things got so heated. I never meant to step on your relationship with your dad. I just want him to be happy and safe." That's all. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I get that. But he's my dad." I need space to figure out what that means again, without someone else deciding for us. She didn't respond, but I didn't expect her to. Some truths don't need a reply. Eventually, Dad came by Lisa's to visit. He looked older, softer somehow. He brought a box of Mom's things photo albums, her old recipe cards, even the little charm bracelet she used to wear. She'd want you to have these, he said quietly. We sat together on the couch, flipping through the photos. For the first time in a long time, we talked about her. Rarely talked. Not as a wound, but as a person we both missed. I think I've been trying to replace her, he said suddenly. Not Ruth exactly, but the emptiness. I thought if I could make things feel normal again, maybe I'd stop feeling guilty for moving on. I nodded. You don't have to feel guilty, Dad. You just have to remember that moving on doesn't mean moving over me. He smiled sadly. You're a lot wiser than I was at 17. I laughed. Probably because I've had to be. He looked down, eyes glistening. I'm sorry, kiddo, for not seeing how much this was hurting you. Ruth and I will figure out boundaries together. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I did. But more than that, I wanted us to find our rhythm again, not as the broken pieces of a family, but as two people still learning how to love through the cracks. The weeks after that were slow but steady. I started spending weekends back home, easing into the old rhythm. Ruth was careful around me, quieter. I could tell she was trying. And maybe that was enough for now. One evening, as I was heading to my room, Dad stopped me. Hey, he said, holding up his mug. Hot cocoa, like old times. I smiled. Sure. We sat on the porch, steam rising in the cold air, watching the world turn gold in the fading sun. For a moment, everything was still. Our arguments, no invisible walls, just us. Grief, I realized, never really leaves. It just changes shape. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a silence. Sometimes it's a conversation you didn't know you needed, and maybe that's okay. Maybe healing isn't about choosing between the past and the present, but learning how to let them coexist without tearing each other apart. Dad took a sip of his cocoa and looked at me. You know, your mum used to say I was stubborn. I grinned. Wonder where I get it from. He chuckled, the sound soft and genuine. Guess we both need to learn when to bend a little. Yeah, I said, leaning back against the railing, but not too much. He laughed again, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. Not perfect, not whole, but real, and maybe that's enough.